The morning sun broke over the red cliffs of Arizona Territory, painting Thomas Rourke's weathered face in shades of copper and gold. He stood on the porch of his ranch house, coffee mug in hand, watching the dust devils dance across the barren landscape. Nearly 40 years had carved deep lines around his eyes, each one a testament to loss and solitude in this unforgiving land. It had been 5 years since Mary died in childbirth, taking their unborn son with her. 5 years of empty beds and silent suppers. The ranch, perched high on a plateau 2 days' ride from the nearest settlement, had become both sanctuary and prison. Here, among the scorched earth and towering mesas, Thomas could forget the screams of Apache warriors he'd killed during his time as a cavalry soldier. Here, he could pretend the ghosts didn't follow him into his dreams. The spring of 1878 had arrived with unusual violence. Dust storms swept through the valley like biblical plagues, coating everything in fine red grit. His sheep huddled together, ribs showing through patchy wool, while coyotes grew bold with hunger, prowling closer to the ranch each night. Thomas had taken to sleeping with his Winchester by the bed, though he wondered sometimes if it would be a mercy to let the predators take what they wanted. This particular morning followed the worst storm yet. The wind had howled like a wounded animal all night, rattling the shutters and tearing at the roof. Thomas had lain awake, listening to the fury outside, remembering how Mary used to press against him during such storms, her small hands clutching his nightshirt, as he stepped off the porch to survey the damage. Something caught his eye. The barn door hung open, swinging lazily in the morning breeze. He distinctly remembered barring it the night before, had made a point of it with the storm coming. His hand instinctively moved to the colt on his hip as he approached. The barn's interior was dim, dust motes floating in the shafts of light that pierced through gaps in the walls. The horses nickered nervously in their stalls, eyes rolling white. And there, in the far corner where he usually stored feed, sat 3 figures, women, Apache women. They sat with their backs straight, hands folded in their laps, watching him with eyes as dark and unreadable as the desert night. Dirt streaked their faces, and their traditional deer-hide dresses bore the marks of hard travel. The eldest appeared to be in her mid-20s, built strong and tall with the bearing of someone accustomed to hardship. The second seemed younger, perhaps 20, with keen eyes that tracked his every movement. The youngest couldn't have been more than 18, her face still holding traces of girlhood beneath the grime. Beside them lay a leather pouch and a piece of deer hide with Apache symbols burned into it. Thomas approached slowly, keeping his hand near his gun. The women didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. He picked up the hide, squinting at the markings. His Apache was limited, picked up during his army days, but he could make out the message. You saved me. This is my debt repaid. Be their husband. The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, looking from the message to the women, his mind racing. Then he remembered. 3 winters ago, during a blizzard, he'd found an Apache chief half dead in a ravine, shot up by federal troops, against every instinct trained into him by the army. Thomas had dragged the man to his ranch, tended his wounds, and sent him on his way with supplies when he'd healed. The chief had promised to repay the debt. Thomas had thought nothing of it, had wanted nothing from it. No, he said aloud, though whether to the women or to himself, he wasn't sure. No, this isn't. You can't stay here. The eldest woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanging. She said something in Apache, her voice low and steady. The younger 2 remained silent, but their eyes held the same unwavering determination. Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair, panic rising in his chest. You have to leave, understand? Leave! He made shooing gestures toward the door. They didn't move. He tried again in broken Apache, then Spanish. Nothing. They sat like statues, patient and immovable as the mountains themselves. The sun climbed higher, and still they sat. Thomas paced the barn, occasionally stopping to argue with them, to plead, to demand. They weathered his words like rocks in a stream, letting them flow past without effect. Finally, exhausted and confused, he retreated to the house. From his kitchen window, he could see the barn. He watched it as he mechanically prepared his noon meal, half expecting the women to slip away. But when he returned hours later with water and food, his conscience wouldn't let him leave them hungry. Whatever else he might do, they remained exactly as he'd left them. The eldest accepted the provisions with a slight nod. Up close, he could see the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way she assessed him. The middle sister examined the food carefully before eating, while the youngest grabbed at it with barely concealed hunger. That night, Thomas lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could hear movement in the barn, soft voices speaking Apache, the rustle of bodies settling for sleep. He thought of Mary, of her gentle ways and soft white hands. She would have been horrified by this situation. Or would she? Mary had always possessed a practical kindness, a way of accepting what couldn't be changed. He thought too of the town, of what people would say when they found out. A white man harboring Apache women, it would be scandal at best, violence at worst. The war might be over, but the hatred lingered like smoke from a wildfire, ready to reignite at the smallest spark. Yet, as the night deepened and exhaustion finally claimed him, Thomas found himself thinking not of the complications or the impropriety, but of the sound of voices in his barn, human voices. After so many years of silence, even if he couldn't understand the words, even if the situation was impossible, for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't entirely alone. The coyotes howled in the distance, but tonight they seemed farther away. Their threat diminished somehow, and when sleep finally came, Thomas dreamed not of war and death, but of 3 pairs of dark eyes, patient and waiting, as eternal as the red rocks that surrounded his exile. Dawn came with the crow of his rooster, and Thomas found himself standing before the barn door again, a tray of biscuits and salt pork balanced in his hands. The women were awake, sitting in the same position as yesterday, as if they hadn't moved at all during the night. Their dark eyes tracked him as he set the food down and retreated to what he hoped was a safe distance. "Listen," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm going to feed you, give you water, but then you need to go back to your people. Understand?" The eldest woman, he decided to think of her as the leader, reached for the food with deliberate grace. As she moved, he noticed the powerful set of her shoulders, the way her hands showed calluses from work and warfare. She was no delicate flower, but a woman forged by the harsh desert life. When she looked at him, her gaze was direct, challenging, as if daring him to look away first. The middle sister moved differently, quieter, more observant. Her eyes missed nothing, cataloging every tool hanging on the barn walls, every exit, every shadow. When she took her portion of food, her fingers moved with surprising delicacy, and Thomas noticed how she examined the stitching on the cloth he'd wrapped the biscuits in, running her thumb along the seams with interest. The youngest was harder to read. She grabbed at the food with the eagerness of youth, but watched him with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. When he accidentally met her eyes, she lifted her chin in a gesture that was pure, stubborn pride, reminding him painfully of Mary in one of her rare tempers. For 3 days, this pattern continued. Thomas would bring food and water, try to convince them to leave, and retreat in frustrated defeat. They refused his offers of proper clothing, remaining in their travel-worn deer-hide dresses. They cooked their own meals when he brought them raw meat, using methods that filled the barn with unfamiliar but not unpleasant smells. They walked barefoot around the ranch, their movements so quiet he often didn't know they were near until he turned and found one watching him. On the 4th day, Thomas decided he needed supplies and, though he hated to admit it, advice. The ride to Cedar Ridge took the better part of 2 days, and he spent the entire journey worrying about what he'd find when he returned. What if they robbed him blind? What if they burned the place down? What if someone else found them there? The town of Cedar Ridge sprawled along a muddy main street, a collection of rough-hewn buildings that seemed to crouch beneath the endless sky. Thomas hitched his horse outside Morrison's general store and tried to appear casual as he gathered supplies. He was reaching for a sack of flour when Carl Morrison's voice cut through his concentration. "Tom Rourke, haven't seen you in near 2 months. Beginning to think the coyotes got you." Thomas forced a smile. "Still breathing. Carl. Just been busy with the ranch. Heard there was some Indian trouble up north. Army's been through twice this week." Carl leaned on the counter, his thick fingers drumming against the wood. "You ain't seen nothing up your way? Nothing but dust and hungry sheep," Thomas replied, hoping his voice sounded normal. He paid for his supplies quickly, eager to leave. But as he loaded his horse, he noticed people staring. Had word somehow gotten out? Impossible. No one had been to his ranch. Then he saw them. The 3 women stood at the end of the street, still in their Apache dress, still barefoot, watching him with those patient eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs. How had they followed him? He hadn't seen them once during the journey. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Women pulled their children closer. Men's hands drifted toward their weapons. Thomas felt the situation balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into violence at the slightest provocation. Well. The voice belonged to Jake Henley, a buffalo hunter who spent his earnings on whiskey and whores. He swaggered forward, his greasy hair hanging over bloodshot eyes. "Tom Rourke's got himself some squaw entertainment. Always knew you had peculiar tastes." "They're just passing through," Thomas said carefully, moving to place himself between Henley and the women. "Passing through your bed, more like." Henley laughed, an ugly sound. "How much you paying them, Rourke? Or did you just take what you wanted, like the old days?" The youngest woman, he still didn't know their names, stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Henley reached out, presumably to touch her, and Thomas reacted without thinking. His fist connected with Henley's jaw, sending the man sprawling in the mud. "You touch any of them," Thomas heard himself say, "and I'll kill you where you stand." The street went silent. Henley struggled to his feet, spitting blood and curses, but something in Thomas's eyes must have warned him off. He slunk away, throwing threats over his shoulder. Thomas turned to the women. "Get on the horses," he said in Apache, one of the few phrases he knew. Whether they understood the words or just the urgency in his voice, they moved toward his animals. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Thomas constantly checking over his shoulder for pursuit. The women rode with a natural grace, handling the horses as if born to it. They maintained their silence, but he felt their awareness of everything around them, every sound, every movement, every shift in the wind. That night, after they'd returned to their corner of the barn, the eldest came to the house. Thomas was cleaning his rifle when the door opened without a knock. She stood in the doorway, tall and proud, firelight playing across her strong features. "You," she spoke slowly, carefully, in heavily accented English. "You fight for us." Thomas set down his rifle. "I won't let anyone hurt you, but you can't stay here. People won't understand." She moved closer, and he caught her scent, sage and smoke and something wild. "We stay. The chief, our father, says we are yours now." "I don't want," Thomas began, but she placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. The touch burned through his shirt. "You are husband to us, all 3. Her English was broken, but her meaning clear. "This is the way. That's not how it works here," Thomas said, his voice rough. "White men don't. We marry one woman. One." She tilted her head, studying him with those dark eyes. "Your woman is gone. You're alone. We are alone. The chief saves us from bad marriage, gives us to good man." Her hand remained on his chest. "You are good man. We see this." Thomas stepped back, breaking the contact. "You don't even know me." "We know." She moved to the door, but paused before leaving. "I am called—" She said something in Apache, then added, "In your tongue, rose, like flower, but with thorns." After she left, Thomas slumped in his chair, mind reeling. Rose. At least now one of them had a name he could pronounce. He thought of the other two, waiting in the barn. What were their names? What were their stories? How had they ended up as payment for a debt their father owed? Outside. A coyote howled, but it sounded distant, unthreatening. Through his window, he could see a faint light in the barn. Perhaps they'd built a small fire to ward off the desert cold. The sight stirred something in him he'd thought dead with Mary. Not desire, not yet, but a recognition of shared humanity, of lives lived in the margins of an unforgiving world. He'd protected them today in town, claimed them, in a way, with his fists and his threats. The implications of that action would ripple outward. He knew. Come morning, he'd have to make decisions that would change the course of all their lives. But tonight, he simply sat and watched the light in the barn, wondering at the strange turns fate could take in this wild, untamed land where the rules of civilization bent and broke against the harsh realities of survival. The early summer rains came unexpectedly, turning the red dust to mud and filling the arroyos with rushing water. Thomas had been mending fences when the first drops fell, and by the time he made it back to the ranch house, he was soaked through. Thunder rolled across the plateau like artillery fire, bringing back memories he'd rather forget. He found the three women had moved from the barn to the covered area between it and the house, huddled together as the rain pounded the earth. Without thinking, he gestured to his door. "Come inside. You'll catch your death out here." They exchanged glances. Rose, the one who'd named herself for thorns, nodded to the others. They followed him in, water dripping from their hair and clothes onto his clean floor. Mary would have fussed about the mess, but Mary wasn't here anymore. "I'll get some blankets," he muttered, turning away. But a hand on his arm stopped him. The middle sister stood there, her keen eyes studying his face. She pointed to herself and said carefully, "Sarah, I choose Sarah." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Sarah? That's a good name. A Christian name." She smiled, the first time he'd seen any of them truly smile, and it transformed her face. "I hear in town. Pretty name. Like me?" Despite himself, Thomas felt his mouth twitch. "Yes, it suits you." The youngest pushed forward then, rain still streaming down her face. "I want name too. I pick—" She scrunched her face in concentration. "Grace, I am Grace." "Lord knows you could use some," Thomas said dryly, remembering her defiant glares. But she just grinned, pleased with herself. So now they had names he could use: Rose, Sarah, and Grace. It made them more real somehow, more present in his world rather than mysterious figures from another life. That night, with the rain still drumming on the roof, Thomas made coffee and found himself sitting at his kitchen table with three Apache women, teaching them English words while they showed him how to properly prepare prickly pear cactus for eating. It was surreal and strangely domestic. Sarah proved the quickest learner, absorbing new words like desert soil soaking up rain. She had clever hands too, fixing a tear in his shirt with stitches so fine he could barely see them. Rose remained challenging, questioning everything, pushing boundaries. And Grace was like quicksilver, one moment helping with chores, the next racing her shadow across the desert, wild and free. 2 weeks passed in this strange new rhythm. Thomas taught them English. They taught him their ways. He showed them how to tend the sheep. They showed him which plants could heal wounds and which would poison. Slowly, carefully, they began to carve out a shared existence. Then came the night everything changed. Thomas woke from a nightmare, not the usual one of dying Apache warriors, but of Mary, pale and bleeding, reaching for him with accusing eyes. He stumbled from bed, needing air, and found Grace sitting on his porch, knees drawn to her chest, crying silently in the moonlight. "What's wrong?" he asked, lowering himself beside her. She turned to him, and in the silver light, she looked impossibly young. "I miss home, miss mother. She dead now. Father gives us away because no one else will take daughters of dead wife. Bad luck," he says. The pain in her voice cut through him. Without thinking, he put an arm around her shoulders. She stiffened, then melted against him, her tears soaking his nightshirt. "I know about missing," he said quietly. "My wife died 5 years ago. The missing doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you can carry." Grace lifted her face to his, and suddenly the space between them crackled with tension. She leaned closer, her intentions clear in her eyes, and Thomas felt his resolve weakening. She was beautiful in the moonlight, young and alive and wanting him. "Grace, no," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. "You're too young, and you don't— This isn't why you're here." "Then why?" she demanded, pulling back. "Why we here if not for this? You protect us, feed us, teach us, but you don't want us. Are we so ugly to white men? That's not—" Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "You're not ugly. Any man would be lucky to— But this isn't right. You're not cattle to be traded for a debt." "Then what are we?" Rose's voice came from the doorway. Thomas turned to find both sisters watching. "We cannot go back. No Apache man will take us now. We are marked as belonging to white man. You refuse us. We have nothing. No people. No place." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. By accepting them, even temporarily, he'd altered their lives irrevocably. They couldn't return to their old life any more than he could return to his. Sarah stepped forward, moving with her characteristic quiet grace. "Thomas," she said, his name still carefully pronounced. "We choose this. Choose you. Not because Father says, because you're a good man, gentleman. We see how you care for sick sheep, how you speak of dead wife with love, not anger. We choose." The next days passed in a haze of confusion and growing awareness. Thomas found himself noticing things he'd tried to ignore. The curve of Rose's neck when she bent over her sewing. The way Sarah hummed Apache songs while she worked. How Grace's laughter rang across the desert like bells. He was drowning in their presence, in the warmth they brought to his cold life. The crisis came 3 days later. Thomas was fixing the roof, sweat running down his back in the afternoon heat. When he slipped, the world tilted, and he fell, landing hard on his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, and darkness ate at the edges of his vision. He woke in his own bed, shoulder bound, with Sarah's cool hands on his forehead. She'd stripped him to the waist to tend his injuries, and her touch was gentle but sure. Fever burned through him, probably from infection, common enough with injuries out here. For 2 days he drifted in and out of consciousness. Sarah never left his side, spooning broth into his mouth, cleaning his wound, singing soft Apache lullabies when the pain grew too much. Rose and Grace took turns bringing water and supplies, but it was Sarah who held him through the worst of it. On the 3rd morning, he woke clear-headed to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, one hand still resting on his arm. In the early light, she looked exhausted, but beautiful, her face soft with sleep. Something shifted in his chest, a wall crumbling that he'd built 5 years ago over Mary's grave. Sarah's eyes opened, immediately checking his face. "Fever gone," she said with relief. "You scared us." "I scared myself," Thomas admitted. He caught her hand in his. "Thank you." She looked at their joined hands for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Thomas," she whispered, and then she kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, nothing like the desperate hunger Grace had shown or the challenging fire he sensed in Rose. It was a question and an offer and a promise all at once, and Thomas, weak from fever and worn down by loneliness, answered it. When they broke apart, Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "I wait for you to see me," she said simply. "Really see me." "I see you," Thomas said, and realized it was true. He saw all of them now, not as burdens or obligations or exotic strangers, but as women who'd been thrust into his life by circumstances beyond anyone's control, making the best of an impossible situation. That evening, as Thomas sat on the porch still weak but healing, the 3 sisters performed a traditional Apache dance in the yard. Their voices rose in harmony, their bodies moving with ancient rhythms. And Thomas felt something inside him that had been frozen since Mary's death finally begin to thaw. He didn't know what the future held, The town would never accept this arrangement. The law might have something to say about it. Hell, his own conscience wasn't entirely quiet on the matter. But watching them dance in the fading light, Rose proud and fierce, Sarah graceful and knowing, Grace wild and free, Thomas understood that some things were beyond the reach of civilization's rules. They finished their dance and came to sit near him, not touching but close enough that he could feel their warmth. Together they watched the stars emerge over the desert. 4 souls bound by chance and choice in a land that demanded nothing less than everything. Tomorrow, Rose said quietly, you must decide, keep us or send us away. But know this, whatever you choose, we have already chosen. Thomas nodded, knowing she was right. The time for indecision had passed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. But tonight, sitting here with these remarkable women who'd somehow become part of his life, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 long years. He felt alive. Summer settled over the Arizona plateau like a heavy blanket, bringing scorching days and nights that offered little relief. The arrangement at the ranch had found its own rhythm. The 3 sisters had moved into the house, each claiming their own space while Thomas struggled with the propriety of it all. He'd given them his bedroom, taking to sleeping in the small room that had once been meant for a nursery, though none of them spoke of this sacrifice. The complications began, as Thomas had known they would. With proximity and human nature, Rose challenged him constantly, her warrior's pride clashing with his attempts to maintain distance. She would stand too close when he worked, her presence a constant test of his resolve. One evening, as he repaired harnesses in the barn, she cornered him against the wall. You are afraid, she said, her dark eyes flashing. Afraid of wanting us. I'm trying to do what's right, Thomas replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Right, Rose laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right is survival. Right is choosing life over death. You choose death every day, Thomas Rourke. You sleep alone with ghosts while 3 living women wait. Before he could respond, she pressed her lips to his, fierce and demanding. For a moment, Thomas lost himself in the kiss, his hands tangling in her long black hair. She tasted of sage tea and determination. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That is life, she said simply, then walked away, leaving him shaken. Sarah approached things differently, where Rose pushed. Sarah simply existed in his space with quiet grace, caring for him in ways that slowly broke down his defenses. She learned his preferences, how he liked his coffee, which shirts needed mending first. When his old war wounds ached, her gentle ministrations were a kind of seduction he had no defense against. One afternoon, as she helped him tend a sick ewe, their hands touched over the animal's wool. The contact sent lightning through him, and when he looked up, Sarah was watching him with knowing eyes. My mother once said, she spoke carefully in her improving English, that love comes in many forms, like water in the desert, sometimes a flood, sometimes a gentle rain, sometimes hidden deep underground, all necessary. Grace was perhaps the most complicated. Young and impetuous, she swung between childlike playfulness and woman's desire with dizzying speed. She would race her horse across the desert with wild abandon, then return to drape herself across furniture in ways that made Thomas distinctly uncomfortable. The tensions came to a head on a sweltering July day. Thomas had ridden to check on the far pastures, and Grace had insisted on accompanying him. They stopped at a small oasis fed by an underground spring, where cottonwoods provided rare shade and a pool of clear water promised relief from the heat. Grace dismounted and immediately began removing her outer clothing. Too hot, she declared, wading into the pool in her underthings before Thomas could protest. Grace, you shouldn't, he began, but she turned to face him, water streaming down her copper skin. Why you reject us? She demanded, her usual playfulness replaced by hurt. Are we not beautiful enough? Not white enough? That has nothing to do with... Then what? She moved closer, the water only waist deep. You want us. I see how you look at Rose when she walks, how you lean into Sarah's touch, how your eyes follow me. Why do you torture yourself? Thomas found himself at the water's edge, drawn despite himself. Because you deserve better than this, better than a broken-down soldier old enough to be your... You deserve choice. Grace. Real choice. I choose you, she said simply, reaching for his hand. We all choose you. Every day we stay, we choose. The water was cool against his skin as she pulled him in, fully clothed. For a moment, they stood there, the desert heat forgotten, the impossibility of their situation suspended. Grace reached up to touch his face, and Thomas felt his last defenses crumbling. Please, she whispered, let us love you. What followed was inevitable as summer rain, in that hidden oasis. Surrounded by ancient stones and watchful sky, Thomas finally surrendered to what had been building for months. Grace was neither child nor woman, but something in between, wild and sweet and achingly present. When they finally emerged from the water, something fundamental had shifted between them. The ride back to the ranch was silent, both lost in thought. As they approached, Thomas saw Rose and Sarah waiting on the porch, and he knew from their expressions that they understood what had happened. He expected anger, jealousy, the emotions that would have torn apart any normal household. Instead, Rose stepped forward and took his horse's reins. It has begun, she said simply. Sarah smiled and touched Grace's shoulder in what looked like approval. That night, the dynamics in the house shifted palpably. Grace no longer hid her affection, curling against Thomas's side as they sat by the fire. Rose watched with calculating eyes, while Sarah continued her quiet caretaking with a new tenderness. The complications multiplied. Thomas found himself navigating not just his own confused feelings, but the complex relationships between the sisters. They had their own hierarchies, their own conflicts. Rose and Grace clashed over household duties, their arguments in rapid Apache filling the house with tension. Sarah mediated with patient wisdom, but even she had moments of sharp jealousy when attention tilted too far from her. One evening, after a particularly heated argument between Rose and Grace over who would help Thomas with the evening chores, he found himself standing between them, frustration boiling over. Enough, he shouted, startling them into silence. I didn't ask for this. Any of this. You can't fight over me like I'm some prize bull at auction. Rose's eyes flashed dangerously. You think we fight over you? We fight over survival, over place, over honor. She stepped closer. You understand nothing of our ways. Then teach me, Thomas said, suddenly exhausted. Help me understand, because right now, I feel like I'm drowning. The admission seemed to diffuse the tension. The three women exchanged glances, conducting one of their wordless conversations. Finally, Sarah spoke. In our culture, sometimes a man has more than one wife. But there are rules, ways. The first wife has authority. The others have their places. But you... She paused, searching for words. You don't choose. You treat us all the same. It creates confusion. Thomas sank into a chair, head in his hands. I can't choose between you. Don't ask me to. Then we choose for you, Rose declared. She moved to stand before him, every inch the chief's daughter. I am eldest. I claim first position. Sarah, second. Grace, third. This is the way. But Grace immediately protested. I was first to seduce him? Rose's voice was cutting. That makes you bold, not first. The argument that followed was spectacular, conducted in a mixture of Apache and English, with gestures that needed no translation. Thomas watched helplessly as the women he'd grown to care for tore at each other with words. Finally, he stood and walked out, letting the screen door bang behind him. He made it to the barn before Sarah caught up with him. They don't mean the cruel words, she said softly. They are afraid. Of what? Of loving a man who doesn't know how to be loved by three women, of being abandoned, of having no place in your world or ours. Thomas turned to face her, seeing the worry in her eyes. I don't know how to do this, Sarah. I barely knew how to be a husband to one woman. She stepped closer. placing a hand over his heart. Then learn. We will teach you. But you must stop fighting yourself. Stop feeling guilt for wanting life after death. That night, Thomas made a decision. He called all 3 women to sit with him at the kitchen table, the lamp casting golden light over their faces. I can't follow Apache ways completely, he said. And I can't follow white ways in this, so we make our own way. No first wife or third wife. You're all... He paused, searching for words. You're all necessary. Like Sarah said about water, different, but all needed. The town will never accept this, Rose pointed out. Then we deal with the town when we must. But here, on this ranch, we make our own rules. Grace smiled brilliantly. Our own rules? I like this. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It will be difficult, but many things worth doing are difficult. Rose was the last to agree, but when she did, it was with a firm nod. Then we forge a new way, together, as if to seal the agreement. She stood and moved to Thomas, kissing him with the same fierce passion as that day in the barn. This time, he didn't pull away. When they parted, Sarah took her place, her kiss gentle but no less meaningful. Grace practically bounced with impatience before claiming her turn, her kiss full of joy and promise. That night, for the first time, Thomas didn't sleep in the converted nursery. The boundaries they'd all maintained dissolved like morning mist. What replaced them was complicated, sometimes awkward, often challenging, but absolutely alive. Later, as the 4 of them lay entangled in the darkness, listening to coyotes sing to the moon, Thomas marveled at the strange turns life could take. He'd thought himself dead inside, frozen in grief. These 3 women had thawed him, challenged him, remade him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would have to be faced. Supplies would need to be bought. The ranch would need tending. The complicated dynamics of their unconventional household would need constant navigation. But tonight, surrounded by warmth and acceptance and the particular intimacy that comes from choosing to build a life together against all odds, Thomas Rourke felt something he'd thought lost forever. He felt whole. The dust cloud on the horizon warned them first. Thomas was repairing the chicken coop when Grace came running from her lookout spot on the ridge, her face tight with alarm. Riders coming, many, with guns. Thomas's blood ran cold. He'd known this day would come, had dreaded it even as he'd allowed himself to hope it might not. Get inside, all of you, now. Rose appeared from the garden, dirt still on her hands. We do not hide. This isn't a debate, Thomas snapped, already moving toward the house for his Winchester. Inside, Sarah. Take them to the root cellar. But Sarah stood firm beside her sisters. We stand with you. Damn stubborn women. Thomas muttered, but there was no time to argue. The riders were close enough now to count 8 men, armed and riding with purpose. He recognized several from town, including Jake Henley, the buffalo hunter he'd knocked down months ago. Leading them was Samuel Morrison, Carl Morrison's brother and self-appointed moral guardian of Cedar Ridge. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled in his arms but not yet aimed. The women flanked him, and he felt a surge of fierce pride at their courage, even as fear gnawed at his gut. Morrison reined up just outside comfortable shooting distance, his weathered face set in lines of righteous determination. Tom Rourke, he called out, we've come to talk sense into you. State your business, Sam, then get off my land. Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dust. The business is those Apache whores you're keeping. It ain't natural, ain't Christian, and we won't stand for it in our community. Thomas felt Rose tense beside him. He placed a warning hand on her arm. These women are under my protection. They've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? Henley pushed forward, his face still bearing a faint bruise from their last encounter. They're savages. Rourke, their kind killed plenty of good Christian folk, and here you are, lying with them like animals. Careful, Jake, Thomas warned, his voice deadly quiet. You're about 1 word away from eating lead. Morrison held up a hand. Now, No need for threats. We've come with a proposition. We'll escort these women to the reservation where they belong. No harm will come to them. You can go back to living like a white man should. And if I refuse," Morrison's expression hardened, "then things might get uncomfortable for you. Might find your water rights contested. Might find no one in town willing to sell to you. Might find worse things than that." Grace stepped forward before Thomas could stop her. "We are not slaves to be moved like cattle. We choose to be here." One of the riders, a young man Thomas didn't recognize, laughed harshly. "Listen to it trying to talk like people." The shot came so fast Thomas barely saw Rose move. The young man's hat flew off, a neat hole punched through the crown. Rose lowered the pistol she'd somehow concealed, her face carved from stone. "The next one goes lower," she said calmly. Chaos erupted. Men reached for guns. Thomas swung his rifle up. Sarah pulled Grace back. And then, cutting through the shouting, came the sound of another shot, this one from Morrison's pistol, aimed at the sky. "Enough!" the older man roared. "Everyone calm down." He glared at Rose. "You're lucky I don't have you hanged for that woman." "Try," Rose replied. And Thomas heard generations of Apache defiance in that single word. Morrison turned his attention back to Thomas. "This is your last warning. Rourke, get rid of them, or we'll do it for you. And trust me, you won't like our way. Get off my land." Thomas said, "Don't come back." The riders milled uncertainly until Morrison wheeled his horse around. "You've got 1 week, Rourke. Use it wisely." They watched the dust cloud recede before anyone spoke. Then Sarah said quietly, "They'll be back, with more men." "I know," Thomas replied. He turned to study the 3 women who'd become his world. "This is what I was afraid of. You could go to the reservation. You'd be safe there." "Safe?" Rose laughed bitterly. "You know nothing of reservations, starvation, disease, soldiers who take what they want. We are safer here, fighting beside you. Even if it means dying." "Everyone dies," Grace said with surprising solemnity. "Better to die free than live in a cage." That night, they prepared for siege. Thomas cleaned and loaded every weapon on the ranch. Sarah organized medical supplies, her knowledge of healing herbs potentially crucial. Grace kept watch, her young eyes sharp for any movement in the darkness. Rose disappeared for several hours, returning with plants Thomas didn't recognize. "Apache remedy," she said when he asked. "For the horses. Makes them run faster, longer. We may need to flee. I won't be driven off my land." Rose studied him with those penetrating eyes. "Pride is a luxury we cannot afford. Think, if we must run, where?" Thomas considered. "Mexico, maybe, or California. Somewhere far enough that—" A sound outside cut him off. All 4 froze, listening. Footsteps, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Thomas gestured for the women to take positions while he crept to the window. The moon was new, leaving the yard in near total darkness. But Thomas had lived here long enough to know every shadow, and several were wrong. He counted at least 3 figures moving toward the barn. "They're going for the horses," he whispered. Rose hissed something in Apache. "Cowards. They try to strand us." Thomas made a quick decision. "Sarah, Grace, cover the front. Rose, with me." They slipped out the back door, moving silently across familiar ground. The intruders were focused on the barn, not expecting resistance from behind. Thomas recognized one profile. Henley, of course. The man couldn't let anything go. Rose touched his arm, held up 3 fingers, then pointed. Thomas nodded. 3 men at the barn. But how many watching the house? How many held in reserve? The answer came with a crash from inside. Grace's scream, quickly cut off. Sarah's voice raised in alarm. Thomas spun toward the house, but Rose grabbed him. "Trap," she whispered urgently. "They expect you to run back." She was right, but knowing it didn't ease the terror clawing at his chest. More sounds from the house, struggle, breaking furniture. Then silence. "Can you handle these 3? Thomas asked. Rose's smile was feral in the darkness. "Go." Thomas circled wide. approaching the house from an unexpected angle. Through the window, he could see two men inside. One had Grace pinned against the wall, hand over her mouth. The other held a gun on Sarah, who stood with hands raised, fury in every line of her body. Thomas didn't hesitate. He kicked in the side door and shot the man holding Grace. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The second man spun, bringing his gun around, but Sarah moved like lightning, driving a kitchen knife into his gun arm. He screamed, dropping the weapon, and Thomas finished him with the rifle butt to the head. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking both women. Grace rubbed her throat. "I'm fine." "But Thomas, there are more." The front door exploded inward. Morrison stood there with 4 men, all armed. "Drop the weapon. Rourke, it's over." Thomas calculated odds, distances, chances. All bad. He started to lower the rifle, then heard it, a sound like an angry wildcat. Rose burst through the window in a shower of glass, firing as she came. 2 men went down before they could react. Morrison dove for cover. The 4th man got a shot off, and Thomas felt hot lead tear across his ribs. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. Sarah threw the lamp, plunging the room into darkness lit only by muzzle flashes. Grace found the fallen man's gun and proved she knew how to use it. Rose became a whirlwind of violence, using knife and pistol with equal skill. And Thomas, bleeding but not badly hurt, put his military training to use. When the smoke cleared, Morrison's men were down. The man himself sat propped against the wall, clutching a wounded shoulder, face pale with shock and pain. "You're done here, Sam," Thomas said, standing over him. "This is my land. These are my women, my family. Come here again and I'll bury you on it." Morrison's eyes blazed with hatred. "You think this is over? You think the town will stand for this? The territory? You're living in sin with savages. Rourke, they'll hang you all. Maybe." Thomas conceded. "But not today." They tied Morrison to his horse and sent him back to town with the other survivors, carrying their dead and wounded. As the last rider disappeared into the night, Thomas finally allowed himself to sag against the doorframe. The adrenaline was wearing off, and his side burned like fire. "You're wounded," Sarah said, already moving to examine the injury. "I've had worse." But he let her lead him to a chair, let her gentle hands clean and bind the wound. Rose and Grace worked to secure the house, boarding the broken window, checking the barn where they found Henley and his companions had fled at the first sound of gunfire. As dawn broke over the plateau, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, the 4 of them sat together on the porch. Thomas's side ached, but the wound was clean, not deep. They'd survived the night, but at a cost. Blood had been spilled. Men had died. There would be no going back now. "They'll return with the law next time," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe the army." "I know." Thomas looked at each of them in turn. Rose with her warrior's pride, Sarah with her quiet strength, Grace with her fierce spirit. "I'm sorry. I've brought this on you." "No," Rose said firmly. "We brought ourselves. We chose this path." She paused, then added with dark humor, "Though perhaps we chose a man with poor aim. You only wounded Morrison." Despite everything, Thomas laughed. It hurt his ribs, but it felt good too. "Next time I'll aim better." "There doesn't have to be a next time," Grace said. "We could leave. Tonight. Take what we can carry and go." Thomas considered it. Start over somewhere new. Somewhere their unconventional family might find peace. It went against every stubborn bone in his body. But looking at these 3 remarkable women who'd chosen to stand with him, to fight for him, to build something together despite all odds, he found his pride mattered less than their safety. "All right," he said finally. "We run, but together, always together," Sarah confirmed. Taking his hand, Rose nodded, her fingers finding his other hand. "The 4 of us against the world." Grace completed the circle, her touch light but firm. Our family. As the sun climbed higher, they began to plan. Where to go, what to take, How to start again. The ranch had been Thomas's anchor for so long, but sitting there with his chosen family, he realized home wasn't a place. It was these 3 women who'd awakened him to life again, who'd stood beside him against violence and prejudice, who'd chosen love in a world that demanded hate. They had perhaps days before Morrison returned with reinforcements. Days to prepare, to gather what they needed, to say goodbye to this piece of land that had sheltered their strange love. But for now, in this moment, with the morning sun warming their faces and their hands linked in an unbreakable circle, they were together. They were family. They were free. And that, Thomas thought as he looked at each beloved face, was worth any price they might have to pay. The morning after the attack, Rose saddled her horse with grim determination. "I go to my father," she announced, checking the rifle she'd claimed from one of Morrison's men. "He needs to know what has happened." Thomas wanted to protest, to keep her safe with them, but he recognized the set of her jaw. "Be careful. Morrison's men might be watching the trails." She touched his face briefly. "I know these lands better than any white man. Wait for me. 3 days. No more." After she left, the ranch felt unbalanced. Sarah threw herself into preparations for their departure, sorting through their possessions with practical efficiency. Grace alternated between helping and standing watch, her youthful energy tempered by the violence she'd witnessed. That first night without Rose, as Sarah tended Thomas's wound with gentle hands, she spoke quietly of her fears. What if they capture her? What if her father refuses to help? Thomas caught her hand. "Rose is the strongest person I know. She'll return." Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. "You love her. I love all of you," Thomas said, meaning it. "Different ways, maybe, but no." Sarah smiled sadly. "You love me. Yes, you desire Grace. But Rose you love like the desert loves the storm, with fear and need all mixed together." Before Thomas could respond, she kissed him softly. "It's all right. Love has room for many shapes." They made love that night with a tenderness born of uncertainty, each touch a promise against an unknown future. Later, as Sarah slept curved against him, Thomas stared at the ceiling and wondered if he'd ever see Rose again. The second day brought unexpected visitors. Thomas was teaching Grace to better handle a rifle when they heard horses approaching. But instead of Morrison's hostile party, a lone Apache warrior appeared, leading a pack horse. He stopped just within speaking distance and called out in accented English, "Thomas Rourke, I bring message from Rose Thorns." Thomas stepped forward cautiously. The warrior was young, perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "What message?" "She says prepare. Be ready to ride when she returns. Her father." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Her father considers much depends on his decision." The warrior gestured to the pack horse. "Supplies. From Rose Thorns. And this." He tossed a leather pouch that landed at Thomas's feet. Inside was ammunition, dried meat, and a small beaded necklace. Sarah gasped when she saw it. "Marriage gift," she whispered. "Apache tradition. Rose is—" She looked at Thomas with shining eyes. "She's claiming you as husband before her people." The warrior nodded. "You understand? Good." He wheeled his horse around. "Be ready." Then he was gone, vanishing into the landscape like smoke. That night, as they inventoried the supplies Rose had sent, Grace found something wrapped in soft leather at the bottom of the pack. She unwrapped it reverently, revealing a beautifully beaded dress. "For ceremony." Sarah breathed. "Wedding dress. But why only one?" Grace held it up against herself, then tried it against Sarah. "Too small for either of us. Must be for—" Her face fell. "For someone else. Someone Rose wants him to marry instead." "Don't be foolish," Thomas said. But doubt gnawed at him. Was this Rose's way of setting him free? Of choosing a proper Apache bride for him? Sarah examined the dress more carefully. "No. Look at the pattern. These symbols." She traced the beadwork with one finger. "Strength, wisdom, youth. 3 different patterns woven together. This isn't for someone else. It's for all of us. On the 3rd morning, Thomas woke to find Grace's bed empty. Panic seized him until he spotted her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the eastern horizon. "She's coming," Grace said without turning. "I can feel it." An hour later, her intuition proved correct. Rose appeared, but not alone. Behind her rode a small party of Apache warriors, and at their head, the chief himself, the man Thomas had saved years ago. Chief Joseph Standing Bear had aged since their last meeting, his hair now more silver than black, but his bearing remained proud. He dismounted with dignity and approached Thomas, studying him with eyes that had seen too much. "Thomas Rourke," he said in clear English. "We meet again. Chief Standing Bear." Thomas inclined his head respectfully. "I'm honored. Are you?" The chief's gaze moved to Sarah and Grace, who had emerged to stand beside Thomas. "You have taken my daughters, all 3. This is unusual." "I've taken nothing," Thomas replied carefully. "They chose. I merely accepted." Standing Bear's weathered face cracked in what might have been a smile. "Rose Thorne says the same. Says you fought for them, killed for them, would die for them." "Yes, and they for you. You'd have to ask them that." The chief turned to his daughters. In rapid Apache, he questioned each in turn. Rose answered firmly, her chin raised. Sarah spoke more softly but with equal conviction. Grace's response was briefer but earned a nod from her father. Finally. Standing Bear faced Thomas again. "The White Town wants you gone. Dead, perhaps, my people." He gestured to his warriors. "Some say I was wrong to give my daughters to a white man, that it brings shame." Thomas tensed, but the chief continued. "But you saved my life, and my daughters say you have given them something they could not find among our people, a place where all 3 can belong, where they need not compete for position or favor. I try to treat them equally, to honor each for who they are. This is not Apache way, not white way either." Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps it is new way. World changes. Maybe traditions must change too." He signaled to one of his warriors, who brought forward a painted shield and a lance decorated with eagle feathers. "These are symbols of honor among my people. Carry them, and Apache will know you are under my protection." Thomas accepted the gifts with appropriate gravity. "I'm honored. Chief Standing Bear, not finished." The chief's eyes glinted. "Rose Thorns tells me you need sanctuary. The white law comes for you. Soon, yes, we plan to run Mexico, maybe, or—" "No." Standing Bear cut him off. "Running solves nothing. You come with us, to the mountains, secret places white soldiers don't know. Stay until tempers cool. Then," he shrugged, "then we see." Thomas looked at the 3 women. Rose nodded encouragingly. Sarah smiled. Grace practically bounced with excitement. "All right," Thomas agreed. "And thank you." As they prepared to leave, Standing Bear pulled Thomas aside. "My daughters are not easy women. Rose Thorns has the spirit of a warrior. She will challenge you always. Quiet Sarah sees everything, judges everything. She will test your wisdom. Little Grace," he smiled fondly. "She is like the wind. Try to hold her too tight. She slips away. Hold too loose. She blows away. I'm learning that. Good. Learn fast. And remember, you saved my life, so I give you my daughters. But if you fail them, if you hurt them, the threat didn't need to be completed." "I understand." The packing went quickly. They took only essentials, though Sarah insisted on bringing her small collection of books, and Grace refused to leave without the music box Thomas had bought her in town. As they prepared to ride out, Thomas took one last look at the ranch that had been his refuge for so long. "We'll come back," Rose said, moving to stand beside him. "When the anger fades, when they remember you are good neighbor, good man, we'll come back. Maybe, or maybe we'll find somewhere new, somewhere we can just be ourselves." She slipped her hand into his. "Anywhere is good, if we're together." The journey to the Apache stronghold took 2 days through terrain Thomas would never have found on his own. They followed hidden trails, crossed streams to break their scent, climbed paths that seemed impossible until you were on them. The warriors treated Thomas with cautious respect, the shield and lance marking him as under their chief's protection. Grace rode with infectious joy, chattering with the younger warriors in Apache, drawing occasional smiles from the stern-faced men. Sarah observed everything with her keen eyes, already learning the route in case they needed it again. And Rose blazed with pride, riding tall beside her white husband, daring anyone to challenge their right to be together. On the evening of the second day, they crested a rise and Thomas caught his breath. Below lay a hidden valley, green with grass and trees, watered by a crystal stream. Wickiups dotted the meadows, and cook fires sent gentle smoke into the twilight sky. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Standing Bear said. "Here, you are safe. Here, you can learn to be family without fear." As they descended into the valley, people emerged to watch their arrival. Thomas saw curiosity, suspicion, even some hostility in the faces. But he also saw acceptance in others, particularly the women who recognized the chief's daughters. That night, they were given their own wickiup on the edge of the camp, close enough for protection, far enough for privacy. As the 4 of them settled onto buffalo robes, Grace produced the beaded dress with a shy smile. "I think I understand now," she said. "This isn't for one of us. It's for all of us, to share, to show we are one family." Rose smiled, the first truly peaceful expression Thomas had seen on her face since Morrison's attack. "Little sister learns wisdom." "Finally," Sarah added with gentle teasing. They talked late into the night, planning their new life. Thomas would help with hunting, learn Apache ways properly. The sisters would maintain their connection to their people while building their own unique path. It wouldn't be easy. Thomas would always be the white man among the Apache, just as they had been Apache women in the white world. But here, at least, they had a chance. As the fire burned low and his women, his wives, his family settled around him for sleep, Thomas felt the last of his old life release its hold. Mary would have understood. He thought, she'd always said his heart was too big for just one person to fill. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He'd need to prove himself to the Apache, show he was worthy of their chief's daughters. The white world hadn't forgotten them. Morrison and his kind would still be searching, still be hating. And the complex dynamics of loving 3 very different women would continue to test him daily. But tonight, in this hidden valley with stars overhead and the soft breathing of his chosen family surrounding him, Thomas Rourke was exactly where he belonged. The broken soldier, the grieving widower, the lonely rancher, all those versions of himself felt like distant dreams. Rose shifted in her sleep, her hand finding his. Sarah murmured something soft and pressed closer. Grace sprawled across all of them with the careless abandon of youth. This was real. This was home. This was worth any battle yet to come. The hidden valley had offered them sanctuary for nearly 3 weeks when everything changed. Thomas had begun to find his rhythm among the Apache hunting with the men, learning their ways, earning grudging respect through his skills and dedication. The 3 sisters had blossomed in this space between worlds, no longer forced to choose between Apache and white ways, but free to forge their own path. Then came the morning when Grace didn't return from her dawn ride. "She probably found a new trail to explore," Sarah said, but worry creased her brow. Grace never missed the morning meal. By noon, Thomas and Rose were mounted and searching, accompanied by 2 Apache scouts. They found her horse first, grazing peacefully near a stream. Then they found signs of struggle, torn earth, broken sage, drops of blood on stone. "She fought," Rose said grimly, reading the signs. "But there were many, 4, maybe 5 men," one of the scouts called out, holding up something that made Thomas's blood run cold. A deputy's badge, likely torn off in the struggle. "They've taken her," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "Morrison must have hired trackers, found our trail somehow." Rose's face was carved from stone. Then we take her back. The ride back to camp was tense with urgency. Standing Bear listened to their report with growing anger. They violate sacred land. Take my daughter. This cannot stand. But when he began organizing a war party, Thomas stopped him. No. If you attack, they'll use it as excuse to bring the army. More will die. Your people. Innocents. Let me go. This is my fight. Our fight, Rose corrected fiercely. Thomas speaks wisdom, Standing Bear said slowly. But you cannot go alone. In the end, it was decided. Thomas would ride to town with Rose and Sarah, while Apache warriors shadowed them, ready to act if needed. They would try words first, violence only if necessary. The journey seemed endless. Thomas's mind tortured him with images of Grace in chains, Grace hurt, Grace afraid. Beside him, Sarah rode in tense silence while Rose muttered what sounded like Apache war prayers. They reached Cedar Ridge as the sun touched the western mountains. The town seemed too quiet. Shutters closed despite the early hour. Thomas felt eyes watching from every window as they rode down the main street. Morrison waited on the jailhouse porch. Deputy Hartwell beside him with a rifle. Morrison's arm was still in a sling from their last encounter, but his smile was triumphant. Tom Rourke, he called out. Brave of you to show your face. Thought you'd be in Mexico by now. Where is she? Thomas demanded, dismounting slowly, hands visible. The Apache girl. Safe, for now. Morrison's eyes glittered with malice. Here's the deal. Rourke, you turn yourself in. Stand trial for murder and fornication with savages, and I'll see she's sent to the reservation unharmed. You run, and well, he shrugged. Lot of accidents can happen to a wild Indian girl who won't cooperate. I want to see her. Sure. Morrison nodded to Hartwell, who unlocked the jailhouse door. Grace sat in the single cell, knees drawn to her chest. Her lip was split, one eye swollen shut, but she raised her head when they entered. Thomas, you shouldn't have come. It's a trap. Quiet, savage, Hartwell snarled, rattling the bars with his rifle butt. Thomas moved faster than thought. His fist connected with Hartwell's jaw, dropping the deputy like a stone. He was reaching for the cell keys when he heard the click of a hammer being drawn back. That's enough, Morrison said, pointing his Colt at Thomas's head. Assaulting a deputy. Add that to the charges. He smiled coldly. You're done, Rourke. Accept it. Let them go. Thomas said, all three. Promise me they'll be safe, and I'll confess to whatever you want. Thomas, no! Grace pressed against the bars. Don't do this! Touching. Morrison's smile widened. But no deal. See, I've been thinking. Why settle for just you when I can have all four? The great Tom Rourke and his Apache whores, swinging together. Now that's justice. You bastard! The window exploded inward. Rose flowed through it like vengeance incarnate, her knife already moving. Morrison spun, firing, but she was no longer there. The blade caught his gun hand, sending the Colt spinning away. Before he could scream, she had him down, knife at his throat. Keys, she hissed. Morrison's face had gone white. You can't. I'm the law here. You're nothing. Rose pressed the blade just hard enough to draw blood. Keys, or I open your throat. With shaking hands, Morrison pointed to Hartwell's belt. Sarah, who'd entered through the door during the commotion, retrieved them and freed Grace. The younger woman flew into Thomas's arms, sobbing. It's all right, Thomas murmured. You're safe now. Very touching. The new voice came from the doorway. Marshal John Brennan stood there, 2 federal deputies flanking him. Everyone stay real still now. Thomas's heart sank. Brennan was known throughout the territory as incorruptible, fair but absolutely rigid in applying the law. There would be no bribing or threatening their way past him. Marshal, Thomas acknowledged, this isn't what it looks like. No, Brennan's weathered face was unreadable, because it looks like assault on a peace officer and attempted murder, not to mention the bodies Morrison here has been writing me about. Quite a mess you've made, Mr. Rourke. Rose still had Morrison pinned, but at Brennan's nod, she slowly released him and stood. Hands visible. Morrison scrambled away, clutching his bleeding hand. "Marshal, thank God," he gasped. "These savages—" "Shut up, Sam." Brennan's voice was mild but carried absolute authority. "I've been investigating your complaints. Interesting thing. Seems several of the men you claim Rourke murdered were wanted criminals. And funny how their deaths happened on Rourke's property after what witnesses describe as an unprovoked attack." Morrison's face went pale. "Now wait a minute. Also curious how you happened to capture this young woman on Indian land. Federal crime? That kidnapping, too, from the look of her face." "Marshal," Thomas said carefully. "What are you saying?" Brennan studied him with sharp eyes. "I'm saying the law's the law, but justice, well, that's more complicated. You fought for the Union, didn't you, Rourke? Got the medals to prove it?" "Yes, sir." "And these women, they're your wives? All three?" Thomas felt the weight of the moment. One wrong word could doom them all. But looking at Brennan's face, he chose truth. "In every way that matters, yes, I love them. They love me. We've made a family." "Unnatural," Morrison spat. "It's against God's law." "Maybe," Brennan allowed. "But last I checked, we enforce federal law, not God's. And federal law says a man can live with whoever he pleases on his own land, long as everyone's of age and willing." He turned back to Thomas. "They willing, Rourke?" "Ask them yourself." Brennan did, addressing each woman in turn. Rose answered with fierce pride. Sarah spoke eloquently of choice and freedom. Grace, bruised but unbroken, declared her love in terms that made Morrison turn red with fury. Finally, Brennan nodded. "Here's what's going to happen, Morrison. You're under arrest for kidnapping and trespass on federal Indian land. Hartwell, too. When he wakes up, Rourke, you and your family are free to go. But," he held up a hand, "I strongly suggest you find somewhere else to go. Feelings run high in these parts. Maybe California, maybe Oregon. Somewhere folks might be more understanding." "Marshal, you can't," Morrison started. "I can and I am." Brennan's hand rested on his pistol. "Unless you'd prefer I dig deeper into your land deals. Sam, funny how many Apache graves end up on property you acquire." Morrison shut his mouth with an audible snap. Within an hour, they were riding out of Cedar Ridge. Brennan's protection ensuring safe passage, the Apache warriors melted out of concealment to escort them back to the valley. Grace rode with Thomas, her arms tight around his waist, while Rose and Sarah flanked them protectively. That night, in the safety of the Apache camp, Standing Bear called a council. The story was told, retold, debated. Some argued for war, others counseled caution. Finally, the chief raised his hand for silence. "The white marshal shows wisdom," he said, "but also truth. You cannot stay here forever, and returning to the ranch brings danger." He looked at Thomas. "Where will you go?" Thomas had been thinking about this during the ride back. "California. There's gold there. Opportunities. Towns being built where no one cares about your past. Only what you can do. We could start fresh." "It's far," Sarah said quietly. "Dangerous journey." "Everything's dangerous," Rose countered. "At least there we choose our dangers." Grace, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "I don't care where we go, as long as we're together." Standing Bear nodded slowly. "Then it is decided. You will go with my blessing, and with help." He gestured, and warriors brought forward supplies, horses, weapons, provisions for a long journey. My daughters chose a brave man, a good man. Take care of them. "With my life," Thomas promised. They spent 3 more days preparing, gathering what they needed, planning their route. Mexican traders in the camp offered advice about trails, water sources, places to avoid. The Apache women taught Sarah and Grace more survival skills, while Rose planned their defense strategies with the tactical mind of a born warrior. The morning of departure came too soon. Standing Bear embraced each of his daughters. whispering blessings in Apache. When he came to Thomas, he clasped his arm in the warrior's greeting. "You saved my life. I gave you my daughters. Now the debt is balanced. What comes next? You build together." As they rode out of the valley, Thomas looked back once at the sanctuary that had sheltered them. Then he faced forward, toward the unknown. Rose moved her horse closer, reaching out to touch his hand. Sarah began humming an Apache traveling song. Grace, irrepressible despite her ordeal, called out challenges to race. They were leaving everything familiar behind. Thomas's ranch, the sisters' people, the land they knew. Ahead lay weeks of hard travel, uncertain welcome, the challenge of building a life in a place none of them had seen. But they were together, 4 souls who'd found each other across impossible divides, who'd chosen love over convention, family over safety. Whatever California held, whatever challenges awaited, they would face them as one. "No regrets?" Rose asked as they crested the rise that would take them out of sight of the valley. Thomas looked at each of his wives. Warrior Rose, wise Sarah, spirited Grace, each so different, each essential. His answer came without hesitation. "None, you." Rose's smile was answer enough. She urged her horse forward, and the others followed, riding toward the western horizon where their new life waited. Behind them, the dust of their passage settled. Ahead, the trail stretched endlessly under the vast sky, and somewhere between what was and what might be, 4 hearts beat as one, bound by choice and courage and the kind of love that reshapes the world. The California Trail had tested them in ways none had anticipated. 6 weeks of scorching deserts, treacherous mountain passes, and rivers swollen with late summer rains. But they had survived, and now they stood on a hillside overlooking the bustling town of Manzanita Creek, where gold fever had transformed a sleepy valley into a place of dreams and possibilities. "It's bigger than Cedar Ridge," Grace observed. Her bruises long faded, but the memory of them adding new maturity to her gaze. "And full of strangers," Rose added, her hand instinctively checking the knife at her belt. "Good. Strangers don't know our past." Thomas studied the town below, a main street lined with hastily built establishments, mining camps spreading up the surrounding hills, people of every description going about their business. Chinese laborers, Mexican vaqueros, freed slaves from the South, Europeans seeking fortune, a melting pot where perhaps their unusual family might find acceptance, or at least indifference. "We need to present ourselves carefully," Sarah said, ever practical. "We have enough gold from the Apache trade to establish ourselves, but how do we explain us?" It was a question they debated throughout the journey. In the end, Thomas made a decision that surprised them all. "We don't explain. We simply are." He turned to face them. These 3 remarkable women who'd changed his life. "We'll find a preacher, make it official. All of us." "Thomas," Sarah said gently. "No Christian minister will. Then we'll find one who isn't too particular. Mining towns are full of them. Men who've run from their own pasts, willing to bend rules for the right price." They made camp outside town that night, wanting to enter fresh and clean in the morning. As they sat around their fire, the lights of Manzanita Creek twinkling below, Thomas pulled out a small leather pouch he'd been carrying since they left the Apache Valley. "I've been saving this for the right moment," he said, opening it to reveal 4 rings, simple bands he'd had the Apache silversmith make from Mexican silver coins. "They're not fancy, but they're perfect," Grace interrupted, eyes shining, one by one, in the flickering firelight. Thomas placed a ring on each woman's finger, speaking words that came from his heart. "Rose, you challenged me to live again. Sarah, you showed me that love can be gentle after storms. Grace, you reminded me that joy exists even in dark places. You've all given me more than I ever deserved. I promise to spend whatever years remain to me trying to be worthy of you." Rose spoke for all of them, her voice strong with emotion. "You gave us choice. Thomas Rourke, in a world that sees us as property or savages, you saw us as equals, as partners. We choose you. Today, and all days to come. The next morning, they entered Manzanita Creek as a united front. Thomas had put on his best clothes, his military bearing evident despite the trail dust. The sisters wore a mixture of Apache and white clothing, having learned to blend both worlds. The beaded wedding dress Grace carried carefully wrapped would wait for the ceremony. Finding a preacher proved easier than expected. Reverend Josiah Pike, a man with whiskey on his breath and regret in his eyes, operated from a tent church on the edge of town. When Thomas explained their situation and showed the color of his gold, Pike's initial shock gave way to pragmatic acceptance. "I've married minors to dance hall girls, Chinamen to Mexican women, and once a fellow to what I'm pretty sure was his own cousin," Pike said with a shrug. "Long as everyone's willing and you're not currently married to someone else, I reckon the Lord sorts out the details." "We'll need witnesses," Sarah pointed out. Pike waved this away. "Got a couple of regulars who'll witness anything for a drink. When do you want to do this?" "Now," Thomas said firmly. "Today. We've waited long enough." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in the society manuals back east. The tent church was half-empty whiskey barrels for pews, morning light filtering through patched canvas. Pike's witnesses were a Portuguese sailor who jumped ship and a former slave named Moses who ran a laundry service. But none of that mattered. The sisters had worked together to alter the beaded dress, adding fabric so each could wear it for part of the ceremony. Rose went first, fierce and proud, speaking her vows in a mix of English and Apache. Sarah followed, her words carefully chosen, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Grace practically glowed, bouncing on her toes as she promised to love, honor, and cherish. Pike, to his credit, adapted the ceremony with surprising grace, binding all their hands together with a silk cord Sarah had carried from the ranch. "What God and circumstance have brought together, let no man tear asunder, by the authority vested in me by whoever's listening. I pronounce you husband and wives. May the Lord have mercy on you all." Moses and the Portuguese sailor applauded. Someone outside fired a gun in celebration or coincidence. And just like that, in the eyes of whatever law operated in this corner of California, they were married. Word spread quickly, as it did in mining towns. The man with 3 wives. Some were scandalized, others curious. But most were too focused on their own struggles to care much about others' domestic arrangements. Thomas used their remaining gold wisely, purchasing a small plot on the hillside with a half-built cabin and water rights. "It's not much," he said as they stood surveying their new home. "It's ours." Rose corrected, "That's everything." They threw themselves into building their new life. The cabin grew room by room. Thomas's construction skills, aided by Rose's strength and Sarah's clever designs, Grace proved to have a gift for growing things, coaxing vegetables from the California soil with the same determination she brought to everything. Thomas found work at the lumber mill, his military experience making him valuable as a supervisor. Rose hunted the surrounding hills, bringing back game to supplement their income. Sarah took in sewing and taught letters to miners' children. Grace, when not tending their garden, learned healing herbs from the Chinese women in town, bridging cultures with her eager curiosity. Evenings were their sacred time. They would gather for the meal, sharing the day's events, planning for the future. The physical aspects of their marriage had found its own rhythm, too. Some nights Thomas slept alone while the sisters talked and laughed together. Other nights, one or another would come to him, and sometimes all 4 would pile together like puppies, seeking comfort and warmth. It wasn't always easy. Rose and Grace still clashed, their strong wills striking sparks. Sarah sometimes withdrew into silence, overwhelmed by the constant negotiation their lifestyle required. Thomas struggled with jealousy when the sisters formed bonds that excluded him, had to learn that their relationships with each other were as important as their relationships with him. But they were building something unique, something that transcended the boundaries others lived by. When Rose announced she was pregnant just before the first winter rains, the joy was shared equally among all 4. "We'll need a bigger house," Thomas said, trying to hide his tears. "We'll need a stronger man," Rose countered. But her tough words were belied by the tender way she held his hand against her still flat belly. Spring brought the baby, a daughter they named Hope, with her mother's fierce eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Sarah and Grace shared the mothering duties as naturally as if Hope were their own. When curious townspeople asked questions, they simply said, "She's ours," and most learned not to push further. By their second year in Manzanita Creek, they had become fixtures in the community. Thomas served on the town council. Rose led hunting parties. Sarah started a small school. Grace became the closest thing to a doctor many miners had, her combination of Apache and Chinese remedies proving remarkably effective. When Sarah announced her own pregnancy, followed shortly by Grace, the town gossips had a field day, but the family weathered the whispers with dignity. Their growing household became a refuge for others who didn't fit society's narrow definitions. The Chinese-Irish couple, the freed slave and his Mexican wife, the widow who dressed in men's clothes and worked her own claim. "We're building more than a family," Sarah observed one evening as their children played in the yard. Hope now toddling after her younger siblings. "We're building a community where different is not just tolerated but celebrated." The years rolled by, bringing new challenges and new joys. More children came, each one loved fiercely by all four parents. The cabin became a proper house, sprawling and slightly chaotic but filled with warmth. Thomas's hair went gray, but his step remained strong. The sisters grew into their power, becoming forces in the growing town. On their 10th anniversary, they renewed their vows in the proper church that had finally been built, with Reverend Pike, now genuinely sober, presiding. This time, half the town attended, their unusual family having proven that love comes in many forms. As Thomas stood with his wives, surrounded by their children and the life they'd built, he thought of that morning so long ago when he'd found 3 Apache women in his barn. How angry he'd been at the disruption to his solitary grief. How certain that it could never work. Now, watching Rose organize the children with military precision while Sarah ensured everyone was fed and Grace made sure they were all laughing. He couldn't imagine any other life. "Regrets?" Sarah asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "Only one." Thomas admitted, "that Mary isn't here to see this. She would have loved you all." "She is here," Grace said with the spiritual certainty she'd developed over the years. "In the love you learned from her, in the way you opened your heart to us. She's in every happy moment." That night, as their household finally settled into sleep, children in their beds, adults in various configurations of closeness, Thomas stood on the porch looking out over the valley. Manzanita Creek spread below. No longer a rough mining camp, but a real town, one they'd helped build. Rose joined him, as he'd known she would. "What do you see? Husband?" "Home," he said simply. "I see home." She leaned against him. Still strong, still challenging, still the woman who'd kissed him in a barn and dared him to live. "Good, because tomorrow Grace wants to add another room. She says we need space for a library." Thomas laughed, the sound carrying across the California night. "Of course she does. And Sarah thinks we should consider taking in that orphan boy from the mining camp." "Naturally. And I—" Rose paused, a rare uncertainty in her voice. "I think it's time we went back. To visit the ranch, my father, show the children where we came from." Thomas considered this. The old pain had faded, replaced by the fullness of the life they'd built. "All right, this summer, we'll go back." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other across impossible divides and created something beautiful from the collision. Inside, Sarah and Grace slept peacefully, dreams of tomorrow already forming. Around them, their children breathed safely. Growing up in a world where love didn't follow rules, where family meant choice as much as blood. It wasn't the life Thomas Rourke had planned, alone on his Arizona ranch with his grief and his ghosts. It was bigger, messier, more challenging, and infinitely more wonderful. It was a life where 3 Apache sisters and 1 broken soldier had proven that love Real love knows no boundaries. It was, in every way that mattered, perfect. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Thomas, Rose, Sarah, and Grace on their unconventional journey to happiness. Where are you listening from today? Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about this tale of love conquering all boundaries in the comments below.